Friends, before listening, don't forget to like and subscribe. That would be the best thank you I can give. Let's get to the story. Dmitry Buskin, explorer of anomalous places. Of all the part-time jobs I've ever had, this one was perhaps the most unusual, albeit quite lucrative. I earned more in one job than I had in a month from almost all my previous jobs. It involved going to a designated location, taking a few photos, gathering information, and leaving. The real trick was the locations I was sent to. I visited abandoned villages, abandoned hospitals, dilapidated mansions, and other haunts of the paranormal. Often, they were located in remote places, inaccessible even by car. Many of them weren't marked on maps, so I had to find them by feel, trudging through dense forests or swamps. But the most unusual part wasn't even that, but the ridiculous rules I was told I had to follow. 1. Taking other people or animals to the site is prohibited. 2. It is prohibited to show or distribute photos, videos, or other data obtained at the sites. 3. Upon arrival at the site, determine whether there is any paranormal activity. 4. If paranormal activity is detected, leave the site immediately. 5. Stay at the site for 6 hours. If activity occurs during this time, leave the site immediately. 6. Take at least 10 photos of the site. 7. If escaping the site is impossible or life-threatening, use the emergency button. Use only in extreme cases. Once a week, I received an order. On the weekend, I would go to the required location, take photos, and return 6 hours later. I worked this way for almost 3 months and never encountered any paranormal activity during that entire time. It felt like this whole mysticism thing was just a joke to keep things interesting. That evening, I was standing in a small, cluttered office waiting for a new order. A young man in a business suit named Anton sat at the desk in front of me. He was always polite, but his gaze was too emotionless and distant. Sometimes he'd stare at me and I'd sit there wondering, is he looking at me or somewhere behind me, through me? He'd also occasionally pause during conversation, as if listening to something. "There's a special condition this time," Anton drawled, looking at me intently. "What is it?" I sighed wearily. "If I find something mystical, I can't help. It seems impossible." "We'll need to get to the facility at night," Anton said, pushing the special items they gave me every time toward me. A voice recorder, an emergency button, and an anomaly detector. "Stay there all night?" "Not necessarily," Anton paused briefly, staring blankly at me. "But we definitely need to get an hour or two of darkness, and the photos need to be taken at night." "At least something interesting," I muttered, stuffing my things into my backpack. "What's this place?" "The abandoned sanatorium Forest Freshness," Anton said, pulling out a transparent file containing several pages. "It tells you exactly how to find it, and, as always, a leaflet with the rules." Yes, I know." I quickly put the file away with the rest of my things. "Always carry these rules with you and read them every time before entering the facility. I know these rules better than you do. Anything else?" "Yes." Anton's voice grew quieter. "Try not to talk to anyone you meet there, and read the rules. Are there any Satanists there?" "No." Anton adjusted his suit sleeve. "You're unlikely to see any people there." "Like mysticism," I chuckled. "Just follow the rules," Anton replied seriously. As I mentioned earlier, I was given special, strange items on every mission. A voice recorder, Taking notes wasn't required, but I used it sometimes. Nothing special. Emergency button. A device similar to a power bank with a large glass-covered red button on one side. I never used it, although I sometimes thought about giving it a try. Anomaly detector. A plastic box slightly larger than a matchbox with a small, unlit screen, like the one in Tetris. There's a small power button at the bottom. When pressed, the screen always shows 0, no matter where the detector is used. With this miracle device, I discovered that there are no anomalies anywhere. If only I had a fortune-telling ball, I could sign up for a battle of psychics. The route description they gave me said I should drive to the middle of a forest road and then walk 2 kilometers through the forest. I tried to time it so I could arrive on this road in the evening and cross the forest just as it started to get dark. But punctuality turned out to be not my strong suit. As a result, by the time I parked the car on the grass by the side of the road, it was already dark. But fortunately, I was well prepared. I took several flashlights with spare batteries and dressed in hiking clothes. My backpack, which I strapped on when I got out of the car, contained everything I needed for survival in the wilderness. Of course, I hadn't forgotten about the useless special gear they'd given me at the office. I turned on my headlamp. Its light picked out tree trunks and branches swaying in the light breeze from the darkness. There was no path or trail anywhere. "That's awesome," I said out loud, pulling my gloves out of my backpack and putting them on. I'd already had enough of getting tangled in nettles once. Glancing back at the car one last time, I moved on. It was unusually quiet, making the crunch of branches underfoot seem very loud. As I passed another tree, I brushed the wet cobwebs clean to my face with disgust. It had rained here during the day, so the air was cold and damp. The scent of rotting leaves, damp earth, and that freshness that always lingers after rain hung heavy in the air. I peered constantly into the darkness, beyond where the flashlight beam barely reached, which soon made my eyes tired. Removing a snagged branch from my backpack, I saw a fallen tree to one side. Not the first. The strong wind made the old trees creak eerily. I involuntarily quickened my pace. Suddenly, I heard branches snapping somewhere nearby. I flinched and immediately turned toward the sound, but saw nothing. Only the branches of the bushes and trees swayed in the wind. "Maybe some kind of animal," I whispered, putting the pepper spray in my windbreaker pocket just in case. While I was grabbing the canister, my eye fell on the anomaly detector. Turning it on, I saw the familiar 0 and was about to put it back when a 1 flashed on the screen. Just for a split second. But it was definitely there. My heart started beating faster. I looked around and listened. Everything was calm. I stood there for a couple more minutes, staring at that damn detector. But now the screen always showed only 0. Did I imagine it? I said out loud, but still continued walking forward. Thoughts began to creep into my head that whoever sent me here might have set me up with this device, triggered its readings to scare me at a certain moment. But why? They pay for results, and because of such idiotic pranks, I might not even get there if I get too scared. Trying to focus my thoughts on nothing else, I sped up and soon saw a rusty metal fence ahead and the outline of an old building behind it. I was there. The sanatorium grounds were quite large. I walked along the fence and soon saw a gate. A breeze had picked up, causing one of the gates to open slightly, producing a long, unpleasant creaking sound that sent shivers down my spine. Once inside the grounds, I pulled out my phone and snapped my first photo. A massive 3-story building, its walls streaked with dark rain stains and patches of mold. My gaze caught on the first-floor windows.
Their glass was broken, but the openings themselves were covered with metal bars. Rusty, but impressive looking. Several small one-story buildings stood on either side of the main building. The paint had peeled off, revealing the brickwork underneath. An overturned shopping cart and several medication bottles with half-erased labels lay scattered on the path leading to the main building. My second photo. Approaching the entrance, I pulled a voice recorder from my backpack and pressed the record button to speak into it. Entering the main building, time 1:25. The old wooden doors swung open with a nasty, ear-piercing creak that echoed through the corridors. I paused at the threshold, surveying the spacious, high-ceilinged lobby. The air was stale and heavy. The air no longer smelled fresh and damp, but dusty and repulsive, reminiscent of a hospital. The walls were wallpapered. They had long since become damp and warped, hanging in tatters, revealing black mold stains and grey, cracked plaster. The floor beneath their feet was tiled, but it was almost invisible beneath a layer of dirt, shards of glass, and pieces of peeling paint. I took a step, and the silence was shattered by the loud crunch of that mush of debris under my boots. Just in case, I glanced at the anomaly detector. The screen showed 0. It felt a little calmer. In the center of the lobby stood a massive wooden reception desk, covered in a thick layer of dust.
An old television lay overturned on the floor nearby, its screen blank and dark. A little to the right was a wide arched doorway, revealing a long central corridor. Its end disappeared into darkness. Picking up my phone, I took a third photo, then stood and listened. Nothing. Only oppressive silence. "Okay," I said quietly, my voice sounding unnaturally loud. Before moving on, I had a couple of important things to do. All this dust and mold clearly weren't helping my health, so I quickly donned my respirator, inhaling the familiar scent of cloth and filter with relief. My headlamp also seemed to be working less brightly, so I replaced the batteries. After that, I was ready to continue on my way. Every step echoed loudly throughout the building. I tried to walk more quietly, searching for places underfoot with less crumbling debris, but it didn't help much. Approaching the doorway that led to the main corridor, I looked into the distance. The lamp had indeed begun to shine brighter, but its beam still faded into the distance, making the corridor seem endless. Yellowed pieces of paper, glass vials, and half-rotted rags littered the floor. The doors on the sides, leading to rooms and other rooms, were a bit unsettling. Some were slammed, others were open or slightly ajar. Ahead, an old couch was visible, abandoned against the wall. Blackened scraps of what had once been bed linen or someone's clothing lay on it in a shapeless lump. Slowly approaching the open door of one room, I peered inside. An old iron bedstead from which, instead of a mattress, hung pieces of gray, rotten cotton wool. A battered nightstand stood nearby, one drawer missing, the other slightly ajar. A dirty chair lay against the peeling wallpaper. At that moment, somewhere on the upper floor, I heard rustling sounds, followed by the sound of glass slamming and briefly rolling. It sounded as if one of the jars or test tubes had fallen to the floor, but instead of breaking, it rolled, gradually coming to a stop. An animal? Or had something in the building given way? My thoughts raced through my head. His hand felt and squeezed the pepper spray in his pocket. "That's it. Enough already. You're a filthy coward," I whispered, trying not to give in to fear. After all, I'd been to so many places, seen so many things. Rats, stray dogs, even wild animals. And now what? The number 1 on the fake device flashed for a moment, and I immediately shit my pants? No, that's not right. I managed to motivate myself and calm the anxiety rising in my throat. The unknown is what scares me most, which means I need to go there and find out what's going on. After all, I'm stuck here for 6 hours after all. Slowly and carefully, I moved down the corridor. There was no staircase at the entrance. Perhaps it should be a little further on. I peered into the slightly open doors to make sure there was nothing there, and I was in no danger. Soon, a passage to another corridor appeared off to the side, stretching off into the distance, but I preferred to follow the main one. Finally, I reached its end. Behind an old door, hanging crookedly on only one hinge, was a staircase leading upward. Each step echoed with a loud, alarming creak, causing me to freeze, trying not to make too much noise. The pepper spray was now always in my hand, ready for instant use. And so, kicking a half-broken syringe out of the way, I found myself on a small landing. I was on the 2nd floor. The ceilings were lower there, and the air, even through my respirator, had a strange, sweetish odor. The light from the flashlight illuminated the corridor, disappearing into the distance. I moved forward slowly, checking each room along the way. Not only were there no animals, but there were also no vials that could have made that sound. Approaching the next door, I tried to turn the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Is it stuck? Was my first thought. I tried turning the handle both ways, hard and soft, but nothing worked. Okay, I whispered, about to move on, when I suddenly heard a sound. Something in that locked room, perhaps one of those bottles from earlier, rolled and lightly hit the wall. I froze, listening to the silence, broken only by my breathing into my protective mask. I wanted to test that stupid detector again. When I took it out and turned it on, I felt a cold sweat run down my back. The screen showed 5. A second later, 6. Then 7. The number increased every second, and when it reached 10, it began to grow at an alarming rate. The numbers began flashing so fast that the number almost immediately became 3-digit, and soon 4-digit. A stunningly loud wooden thud made me almost jump in surprise. It sounded somewhere deep in the building, and at that very moment, the anomaly detector screen went dark. I stood motionless, probably as pale as a statue, my eyes wide with terror. My heart was pounding wildly, as if it wanted to leap out of my chest. With a hesitant movement, I pressed the button on the detector to turn on the screen, but it didn't. This otherworldly Tetris game no longer worked. "Fuck this sanatorium, I'm leaving," I said quietly, and headed back to the stairs. Rule 5 says if there's activity, you have to leave. So that's exactly what I decided to do. Trying to make as little noise as possible, I walked toward the building's exit. The steps made me a little nervous again. I kept listening, but for now, all was quiet. Reaching the front doors, I quickly pushed them open, already planning my way through the forest. But they didn't open. I tried to force the doors open with my shoulder, then with my foot, but it was no use. They didn't even budge. Not wanting to give up so quickly, I delivered a few more furious blows to the lock area, but it was no use. A fucking accident. So what now? I muttered, catching my breath. According to point 7, if there's no way to escape from the facility, you can use the emergency button. But that raises a logical question. What will it do? Call 911? File a complaint? Or maybe detonate, eliminating the only unnecessary witness to the paranormal? I didn't want to touch it yet, especially considering something unhealthy was starting to happen around here.
A building like this must have other exits. I just needed to find them now. I could also tug at the bars on the windows. Maybe I could knock them out or bend them. After all, they're years old. Maybe that would work. But first, I needed to check one more thing. I reached into my backpack and pulled out the file they'd given me at the office. I usually always looked up the rules before going on site, but they never changed. I already knew them inside and out. Thinking I wouldn't see anything new in them this time either, I didn't check them for the first time. And I was wrong. These rules were slightly different from the previous ones, but the main thing was, I'd already broken them. 3. Do not enter buildings. 4. Perform a detector check every 15 minutes. If the readings deviate even slightly from 0, leave the facility immediately. Felt anger at Anton, who, instead of telling me the important information directly, mumbled something about not communicating with anyone, and then snapped, "And read the rules." Was it so hard to say they were different this time? I barked discontentedly into the void. And who could I start communicating with here? With the vials?
I wanted to grab that damn detector, throw it at the wall, and watch it shatter. But I pulled myself together. I needed to get out. All this hatred was definitely pointless here. Deciding to check all my options, I walked to the nearest window and glanced at the bars. They might be rusty, but they were still very sturdy. If I could knock them out, I'd be ready to sign up for a powerlifting competition. Gripping the bars, I tried to wiggle them, but it was no use. Kicking them didn't work either. It seemed easier to just break the concrete wall holding them up. Catching my breath, I stopped and looked out the window. The dark tree trunks behind the metal fence looked slightly ominous. Then my gaze caught on something in the night forest. I looked closer and saw the silhouette of a man among the trees. He was dressed in something light, but he was standing too far away to make out any details. "Hey!" I shouted, banging on the bars. "Hey! I need help!" He didn't react to my shouts, and he didn't move at all. I tried to look closer and get a better look at him, but a lump formed in my throat. I needed to make sure that what I'd just seen was just my imagination. With trembling hands, I started to take out my phone, wanting to zoom in on the intruder. Glancing around the forest outside the window again, I saw no one. Whoever it was, they had gone somewhere. I wasn't sure, of course, but it seemed to me that this person was standing there with their mouth wide open, staring at me without moving. At that moment, I found it hard to breathe, and everything inside me went cold. Okay, that's it. No panic, I muttered to myself. I needed to calm down somehow. I pulled the thermos of coffee from my backpack and took a couple of sips. I felt better, but not completely. I have a spray can for self-defense, and if the ghost dance starts, I'll press the panic button. What can I do? Picking up my phone, I wanted to look at the photo of the building I'd taken before coming in. That would give me a better idea of the surroundings. Another surprise awaited me. There were no photos of the sanatorium on my phone. The last 3 photos, taken in the last 2 hours, were of the forest. I flipped through all my albums, looked in the trash, in other folders, but I couldn't find anything else. They coincided perfectly with the time I'd taken the photos of the sanatorium. What the hell is this? My voice trembled slightly, and when I tried to analyze it all, my hands started shaking too. The first photo was of the building in all its glory. I raised the phone camera to take a picture of it all. What I have now is a photo of the forest, but from the same angle. The camera pointed straight ahead and slightly upward. The second photo was of an overturned shopping cart and some bottles scattered about. Now the second photo shows grass and the bases of trees. The camera, just like then, is pointed downwards.
The third photo was the same story. They were all taken from the same angles, but instead of the sanatorium, there was just a forest in the photos. Goosebumps ran all over my body, and I wiped the cold sweat from my forehead. Even then, it seemed strange to me that there was no road or path leading to this place. But now, I saw it. Fuck, I breathed out, refusing to accept what was happening. Especially when I remembered that earlier, when I'd reviewed the photos to see if they had turned out well, everything had looked fine. It took me a while to come to my senses and stop staring glassily at these photos. I wanted to check other details too. For example, the time. My phone said 1:37. 1:37 had also been 10 minutes earlier when I was about to look at the silhouette among the trees. I remember entering the building at 1:25.
If you think about it logically and try to put everything together, 1:37 is roughly the same moment the detector died and the knocking sounded. But you can't trust just one watch, so I took a second mechanical one with me. Taking them out of my backpack, I saw that they too had stopped at that moment. The second hand twitched, as if trying to move forward, but something was holding it back. A smile appeared on my face, and an involuntary nervous laugh escaped my lips. I picked up the recorder and played the recording of me entering this building. The recording contained the sound of the wind and the rustling of leaves. There was no hint of my voice. My legs gave way, and I sank onto the dusty tiles, my back against the peeling wallpaper. The cold from the floor cut through my pants, but at that moment I didn't care. So the problem isn't that the sanatorium doesn't exist. It's that I'm not there with it. My thoughts raced through my head, one worse than the other. I had no rational explanation for it, nor could I. I don't know how long I sat there, but a noise brought me out of my stupor. It was coming from the long corridor where I'd been looking for the stairs. Something was approaching from there, clumsily stomping across the floor. Frightened, I turned off the flashlight and froze, trying not to move and breathing as quietly as possible. Soon, it was crawling into the lobby. It was almost completely dark, and it was impossible to see anything. But I heard it. It moved jerkily, pounding the floor unnaturally. It felt like someone was trying to crawl, using only their elbows and knees. As it moved, shards of glass and paint flew everywhere, littering the entire floor. It crawled to the middle of the lobby, then approached the counter. There was a vile groan and a hoarse sigh, and I heard something fly into the far wall and shatter. Maybe it was that old television. Then the creature suddenly stopped. I could hear its hoarse, quiet breathing. The debris beneath it crunched, as if it were turning or leaning. Then she crawled toward me and stopped nearby. During her last steps, several tiny shards of glass from the floor flew at me, stinging my face. She was so close. At one point, I physically felt her breath, a barely noticeable movement of air. She must have turned in my direction. It was an unpleasant, foul odor. It smelled of blood and something sour, like old, damp basements. I held my breath so as not to accidentally attract her attention. Then the creature moved toward the front doors, crawling past me at a critically close distance. I felt a slight puff of wind caused by her movement, making the hair on my neck stand on end. A little more, and she would have brushed my shoulder, and then I probably wouldn't have had time to use either the spray or the panic button. And I doubt the spray would have helped at all. Stopping near the entrance doors, she let out another terrifying, hoarse groan, sounding more pitiful than threatening. that clearly didn't make me feel any better. I was already at my breaking point. Sweat was pouring down my face, my whole body itching with tension. Thoughts of trying to escape quietly lingered, but I pushed them aside. Any false move now could be my last. Finally, the creature walked back down that corridor, and its stomping gradually faded into the distance. If escaping the facility is impossible or life-threatening, use the emergency button flashed through my mind. Use only as a last resort, I whispered barely audibly. That'll do. I carefully felt for the backpack lying on the floor nearby and stuck my hand inside, trying to find the button. God knows what it would do, but who cares now? It's unlikely to get any worse than it already is.
Somewhere in the distance, a loud crash echoed through the building. The emergency button was already in my hands. I carefully removed the protective glass and, after a few seconds of hesitation, pressed it. Nothing happened. No flash, no hum, no click. Absolutely nothing. I was in the same darkness, in the same damn place, holding this useless little box in my hands. I laughed silently and whispered, Anton probably just got a short text on his phone. I'm fucked. That's a cool button, I must say. I continued to sit on the floor in the darkness, listening to the sounds. Silence fell again. My head raced, trying to figure out what to do next. My mind was still trying to find a way out and save itself, but I no longer wanted anything. In this situation, everything was pointless. Time passed and nothing happened. From the accumulated fatigue and stress, I passed out without even noticing. When I opened my eyes, I didn't immediately remember the horror I'd experienced. It was morning. The sun's rays, breaking through the curtain of branches and leaves, fell on the damp grass. All around was only forest. The sanatorium now seemed like a terrible dream, a nightmare, something I never wanted to remember again. I lay on a damp clump of grass, shaking slightly from the cold. What? I tried to say out loud, but only came out hoarse. I guess I had a cold. An open backpack lay on the ground nearby, the panic button pressed. To keep from freezing completely, I had to take off my wet clothes. My waterproof jacket was relatively dry, and I threw it over my bare torso. I didn't have any spare pants, so I simply rolled them up, trying to wring them out as much as possible, and then put them back on. After gathering everything into my backpack, I tried to figure out where I was and where I needed to go. Remembering the photographs, I opened the first one. It showed several trees. Checking the image, I managed to find the right spot. When I took this photo, I was facing the main building, so I could roughly tell where I'd come from. Sometime later, I was already walking back to the car. I looked at the forest around me, doubting what had happened during the night, but also doubting that I had gotten out of there. The damp grass glistened in the sun in the rare spots where the trees didn't cast shadows. Birds were singing nearby. Stupid thoughts crept into my head, like I'd gone crazy. Like I'd simply inhaled mold and had a violent trip that was still going on. I tried not to think about all these grim outcomes and idiotic theories, focusing solely on getting out of there. The main thing was that I hadn't stayed at the sanatorium. On the way, I came across that same fallen tree, and it became clear I'd chosen the right route. Less than an hour later, I was back in my car, parked by the highway. My joy knew no bounds. I got out, damn it. Got out of this nightmare. The first thing I needed to do was go to Anton's office, give them all their stuff back, and say goodbye to them forever. I'm afraid I won't survive another encounter with the paranormal like this. When I pulled into town, my phone rang. I was standing at a traffic light and looked to see who needed me. Sanya was visible on the screen. What? Who's that?
I muttered and answered the call, putting it on speakerphone. I had no friends or acquaintances by that name, and I certainly don't remember creating such a contact on my phone. "Hey, what's up?" A cheerful voice came over the phone. "Did you go hiking? How was it going?" "What hike?" I asked hoarsely. "You must have the wrong number." "Your jokes are usually funnier, Max," he chuckled. "You haven't been in touch since yesterday. Went into your forest and disappeared. We're kind of worried about you here. Why do you sound like that?"
What, do you have a cold or something?
Who's this we? I still thought there was some kind of mistake. How did he know about the forest? I'd never told anyone about it. Maybe they were trying to scam me. "Me, your sister, and your mom. Your sister called me 3 times yesterday, and again this morning. You seem weird. Did anything happen on your hike?" "No, everything's cool. I'll call you back." I dropped the call and stopped the car at the shopping center. I wondered who this Sanya was, why he was already in my phone and pretending to know me. First, I checked my call history. My heart started beating faster, and a shiver ran down my spine. Starting yesterday and earlier, I'd been talking on the phone quite often with contacts named Sanya, sister, and mum. They'd called me, and I'd called them. "What the fuck?" I whispered. In reality, my mother had long since passed away, and I never had a sister. I thought maybe it wasn't my phone, and that Sanya had simply gotten it all mixed up. But something was wrong. For some reason, my friend said Yoga's contact wasn't listed in the phone. I'd known him since childhood and knew his number by heart. I dialed the number from memory and waited. I wanted to talk to someone I knew. "Wrong number," came the voice from the receiver. I checked the number several times. There was no mistake. At that moment, Mum called. With a shaking hand, I pressed the green button on the screen. "Hello, Maxime," came her cheerful voice. A voice I hadn't heard in over 10 years. "How are you?" "Ah, hello," I stuttered, unable to speak. "Are you okay? Do you have a cold?" I'll call you back," I said, hanging up and dropping the phone, which had fallen into my lap. Tears streamed down my cheeks. I clutched the steering wheel and looked at the shopping center.
The signs featured brands I'd never seen before. In the parking lot, among the familiar cars, were many unfamiliar models. "What have you done?" I groaned, staring into space. The phone, lying face up on my leg, vibrated and made a short notification sound. I glanced at it and saw an incoming message from Mom. "Call me back when you can. I'll be waiting." I took a deep breath. I needed time to process it all. The phone rang again. This time it was Sister who wanted to hear from me. "Just wait," I whispered, trying to ignore the ringing sound and closing my eyes. The phone rang twice more, but I didn't even look at it. After sitting there for about 10 minutes, I started the car and drove to the office where I used to receive my assignments. On the way, I noticed how much the city had changed. Some houses had been replaced by new ones, while others seemed to have never existed at all. Where there had once been a park, there was now some furniture store. Advertisements for unfamiliar brands and items were everywhere. The usual, super popular ads that had previously poured out of every crack were gone. When I arrived at my destination, I was no longer surprised to find an empty lot where the office building had once been. It seemed Anton no longer existed, nor did their entire office, or me, depending on how you look at it. A few days later, in the evening, I was sitting in a cafe drinking coffee and scrolling through the news on my phone, learning more and more details about this new world. I needed to get my bearings somehow. I've already called all my friends and relatives and talked to them, reassuring them that I'm okay. Now all I have to do is calm down. I'll probably look like a madman who escaped from a mental hospital if anyone hears my story.
Someone who came from another world, through an anomalous sanatorium that never existed.
It would be incredibly stupid to tell anyone everything that happened to me in all seriousness. But posting it as a horror story would be perfectly fine. I think I'll do that. At least let people see it. 2025 then. Okay, I'll get used to it. I sighed quietly and took a sip of coffee. A few minutes after I posted my story, a new message arrived on my phone. You have violated rule number 2. It is prohibited to show or distribute photos, videos, or other data obtained from the facilities. Thank you all for listening. Until next time.